Welcome back to the show. My guest today is Steve Stratton. Steve spent 20 good years, as he says, in the military, but his career spans just about everything, including White House Communications Agency. He's in cybersecurity, got his Green Beret tab in 1986, and is also the author of the Shadow Tier, the book Shadow Tier, and I'm assuming is going to be a series. So, Steve, welcome to the show. You're going to get into all that, but welcome to the show, and thanks for coming on, man.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so let's start right into this. A little bit about where you're from and how did you mentioned earlier that you have volunteeritis, so let's get into a little bit of that. Where you're from, what got you into the Army initially?
I was born in Eureka, California, what I like to call up in the Redwoods, and spent about 14 years there. And then during Vietnam, we moved as a family down to Fremont, California, the Bay Area. My dad was sailing out of Oakland and San Francisco, and essentially ferrying troops over to Vietnam and that kind of thing. So I did most of my high school in Fremont, and in November of my senior year, we moved, which was a little bit of an event in the household because I was fighting to stay with all my friends. But we moved back up north, graduated there, and then knocked around for a little bit, painted some houses, worked in a lumber mill, and then decided I wanted to see the world. And so I went to see all the recruiters, really liked the Navy. My whole family is Navy, by the way, Merchant Marine.
I was going to say, you're...
But then I figured out, talked to some friends and their older brothers, and figured out, hey, I can get promoted much faster in the Army. So I was very mercenary about it right at the start. And
you have to be.
Yeah, and joined up, and in December of '73, headed to Fort Ord for basic training.
Okay, so first of all, because this is right, kind of Vietnam is really winding down at this point. How did your family feel about that, and what was the atmosphere at that time?
The atmosphere was, I grew up in a household, that and a family history tradition that was about service. So my uncles, everybody was in the service. During World War II on my mom's side, one of my uncles was a belly gunner in a B-17, got shot down, and had some crazy stories. So that was good, but they thought I was had lost a couple of marbles when I decided I went in the Army instead of going in the Navy. I mean, there's the pictures of my dad, on Ford Island during Korean War and that kind of thing. So I was a little black sheep there for a while, deciding on the Army.
Right.
But no, they were good with it, and I had scored well enough on the pretest that I had a choice of what I wanted to do. And so I wanted to go to Fort Lewis up in Washington State. Mm-hmm. I figure I'll go up there. It'll be halfway close to home, but it'll be more Pacific Northwest. Hey, I'll be a soldier part-time. I'll be hunting. I'll be out in the woods fishing. It'll be good stuff. And so I signed up, and then in theory, I had a contract for the Ranger Regiment, and then everything changed at basic training.
Mm. Yeah. So what? Go into that, because like I said, at this time, the atmosphere of the country, Vietnam's winding down, kind of chaotic. I would imagine, maybe not in your part in Northern California, in that remote area, but still, it's got to affect you coming in. Talk a little bit about that. What do you do from there?
Yeah. Well, to go back a little bit, having lived in the Bay Area, right, where in our church, some of our friends who were policemen were called up into Oakland and San Francisco to support the police force there for all the riots and everything that was going on, right? We had anti-war protesters. We had a lot going on in the Bay Area, as many people remember.
Right in the thick of it there, yeah.
Yeah, exactly,
right there.
Exactly. So I lived through that as a teenager, but I just felt two things. Number one, compelled to serve the country, But also, I grew up reading National Geographic, and I could care less about California history, about what the capital of the 50 states are, you know, to win the pencil box in elementary school. I wanted to see the world.
Right.
And yeah, so I blame it partly on my aunt and uncle who had that subscription. But so I thought the Army would be a good way to do that. I didn't know a lot about the Army. I didn't know that there was a real potential to just get stuck at some bad post like Fort Polk in Louisiana or something like that in the middle of nowhere. But I joined up, and at basic training one day, the drill sergeants piled us all into the theater and said, hey, there's going to be somebody here. They're sort of recruiting in the military and stuff. Just listen to what they got to say, you know, that kind of thing. So I'm sitting in the back, and it turns out these guys show up in civilian clothes, longer hair, because we're all buzz cut, right? We're just raw recruits. We're all buzz cut. And they're looking really sharp, and they're talking about this thing that they can't really talk about because it's classified and it's in D.C. And I'm like, kept raising my hand. I'm like, oh, you know, it's raining like heck. And so let's just stay warm here in the theater, you know, instead of running around doing PT in the rain. And further along, I found out later that it was guys from White House Communications Agency, and they go around to different bases looking for potential people to bring into the agency. And I'd scored high enough on the electronics, that kind of stuff in my testing that, and I even built we had a class in high school in Fremont where we rebuilt an AM radio station and all this kind of stuff. So they looked at my background and offered me a position at the agency. And when I accepted that, then all my contract changed. So it went from going to Fort Lewis to going through multiple courses on electronics and then being assigned up in Washington, D.C. So after I left basic, I headed to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for a little bit of advanced training, which was strange because that's known as the artillery school. But it was like, here's an eraser, clean these contacts, leave the radio alone. You know, you're just a I think they called him, I forget if it was mechanic or something like that. Yeah. But it was just like on the radio repair side, not even operator at that time. And then
sorry, real quick, I apologize for interrupting. This is a stupid question probably, but I just was the White House communications piece. So they don't recruit from. That's not a solely, obviously, civilian thing. They're recruiting from different branches or just the Army? I just don't know how that works.
Yeah. WACA recruits from different branches. I believe that they now have some civilian slots. I looked at their website, you know, maybe 6 months ago. And I'm sure they have some GS people, you know, some government people in there now. But yeah, it was multi-branch. That when I got there, you know, I was working with the Air Force and Marine and some Navy folks, so it was cross-branch.
Right? Okay, gotcha. So I just I hadn't heard of that specific, you know, that specific organization before.
And the agency itself hides under the Defense Information Systems Agency. So that's the big IT organization that runs the unclassified network and the secret network for the military.
Gotcha.
They're headquartered now in Fort Meade. So. Anyway, so they sent me to these different schools where I learned how to repair radios right down to the little individual component. And when I got up north to Washington, D.C., my first duty station was right in the middle of what's known as Georgetown. And Georgetown is known as a hopping, expensive area at the end of Washington, D.C., along the Potomac. The facility I was at was at the corner of Wisconsin M. There was a gold dome Riggs Bank across the corner, and there were all these bars around. And here I am in civilian clothes, and all these girls out at lunchtime and stuff. And
I was going to say, not a terrible station, right?
No, I thought, God, the military is pretty darn good here, you know. And but what I quickly realized is I had to learn how to operate all this gear, and so I'd been trained to fix it, but not really operate it. I mean, you had to operate it enough to troubleshoot, but so I had to learn how to operate, and I was assigned to the radio section. So a lot of what I did was I worked on commercial equipment from RCA, from Motorola. I really didn't work on military systems. It was about 3 years into my military career before I actually used a military radio system. So it was very interesting. It was a great place to be. Of course, DC, all that was going on, it was still a crazy time, right? So 73, now it's 74. When I got up there, I drove up and my sponsor picked me up. I stayed at this hotel, and he took me around, and he took me around to the Maryland side of the river and a place called Anacostia and that kind of thing. And I remember going down the road and seeing all the chain link fencing and the lights and the barbed wire, thinking, is there a federal penitentiary here? He's like, no, it's just people protecting their stuff in Anacostia. More like Oakland back in the day, right? Or you know what I mean? And we're driving through in on Pennsylvania Avenue, and he goes, you know what that is? And I said, is that the Watergate? He's like, yeah, don't go there. Because it was, when I got there, it was 2 weeks before President Nixon resigned. So,
I was going to say, you were right in that was right in the thick of that. That's right.
Yeah, so as we went by, he says, yeah, don't go there. And he says, by the way, that Howard Johnson's, don't eat there. Because that's where the conspirators had met before they
That's where they had met.
Across the street. So, yeah, so right away I'm in the middle of it. Later on, some more sobering things happened, like they brought the limo in that President Kennedy had been shot in. They brought it in, and it still had radios. And they were totally out of date and everything, but it was our job, my job, to take out the radio systems out of it so the car could go in a museum. But that was a very sobering thing when I realized what car that was that they brought into the shop. Back in those days, it was, it's the 70s, so there is no internet. We're still using phones and long distance and things like that, and radios to communicate. There was no, of course, iPhones, no chat, none of that. So I got this broad spectrum. I learned even about telephone systems and old switchboards with cords and things. And so I was involved in a lot of interesting stuff just in the DC area. My relocation site, in case there was an emergency, was a place called Tyson's Corner, which is on the Virginia side of the Beltway outside of DC.
Yep.
And they said, yeah, hey, if the balloon goes up, that's your relocation site. And I said, you guys know that I know that's inside the blast radius of what they're going to do to Langley, what they're going to do to DIA, what they're going to do to all these different places, right? Are you sure I can't go out to the Blue Ridge and be in one of the caves out there, that kind of thing. And so it was, the balloon wasn't going to go up, but it was just funny that the assignments and things like that. And
I was just going to say, because it's a really, I mean, we look back at that time now, and it just seems chaotic. I'm sure when you're going through it, it was just as it always is with us. It just becomes regular, but there was so much going on at that time, with Nixon and did you have any that you can talk about? Were you in and out of the White House at all? Because President Ford was coming in at that time. Did you have interactions with any of those people? Yeah.
So at that time when I got there, you've got the White House, and perpendicular to the White House is a building called the Executive Office Building. And it used to be that's where the Vice President's office was and those kind of things. And down in the bottom, there was actually two switchboards. The one that was in the phone book with what we lovingly called the two little ladies, old ladies, at the switchboard. And then there was the tactical switchboard that senators, congressmen, the Secret Service, everybody else used, the military knew about, and had different connections into the building. So I learned about that, and so we had this office where we repaired radios in Georgetown. There was another office which was administrative over on Anacostia Naval Station, and we had people. So WACA did all the audiovisual support in the White House. So if there was a microphone hanging, and camera crews would come and set up, but it would be a WACA person that would put the seal on the podium before the president spoke. All those kind of things. So there's interpreters, people that sort of stood by the red phone, the Russian line. WACA is involved in all that. And not only when the president or the vice president travels, but also supporting in the whole Washington area. Yeah, I did get into the White House. I had a badge. I could get onto the White House grounds. I just couldn't walk willy-nilly through anywhere. But we did have assignments and radio equipment in the area, of course, because we also supported the Secret Service. Okay. So the Secret Service agents carried Motorola walkie-talkies. And when I first got there, they didn't even have a privacy mode. So, we were very careful about what you were saying over open channel. Right. They were selected, protected in theory frequencies, but it was not encrypted communication, at least at that level. So there was code words and all kinds of things. But very quickly after that, I'm 19. I'm at the White House. The changes happen. The Fords come in. The changes happen with Vice President Agnew, and Rockefeller comes in. And my first trip out of the United States was to Paris for 2 days, then on to New Delhi, then on to Bangladesh, Dhaka, Bangladesh, for a vice presidential visit. So it was just myself and another guy with some radio gear to support the vice president and the Secret Service team on a sort of quick in and out. And there I was, right in the middle of all that stuff I'd saw on National Geographic, right? So it was a little bit of shock, but a great learning experience.
I was going to say, it sounds, I mean, for me, I'm also a National Geographic, Jacques Cousteau kid, all that stuff. So that sounds great to me. And I as an adult, went to, lived in India for a while and went to Bangladesh and that. But as a 19-year-old going from, that's quite a journey from, you're hanging out in the Pacific Northwest, and then all of a sudden you're in DC, and all of a sudden you're in Paris to New Delhi and all that. So, you did want to join and see the world, and you got to do that, right? So
exactly, it was amazing, and I was getting paid to do it. Not much. I had a clothing allowance. I remember when I first got to WACA, they gave me a $1,000 clothing allowance. So I went to Jacques Penney, right? You remember how big Penney's was in California.
Of course.
And I got, being the suave, debonair kind of guy I was, I got the suits with the 2 pair of pants and the reversible vest. And there's some pictures of me in old passports that I still cringe at. Totally funny. But, that was me. I was an Army E3, E4, eventually an E5, and not a lot of money, but having a lot of fun.
That sounds awesome, and it's really a unique experience. Again, another one of these jobs that the service allows you to get into that most people just have no idea exists. And obviously someone has to take care of those communications. But I just didn't know that was the mechanics of it. So. What other places did you go with Spiro Agnew or any of the other? Because you obviously went around the world a couple times, or was that the one trip? Yeah.
If I could only have transferred those Air Force air miles over to United or Delta, I actually asked them if I could do that because I could prove the air miles, and they're like, "No, not really. We're not making you an instant million miler."
That's right.
But so in the early days, I mean. My first time in Vail was a summer visit to prep for President Ford. He came out for a couple days, which was nice. So I got to know the area, and then we were back during the winter. And my boss said, "Hey, by the way, you need to, you know how to ski, right?" And I'm like, "No, never skied before. I just hike in the snow, snowshoe, that kind of thing." He's like, "Well, go take a class. You're going to carry a radio behind the president, a backup radio."
Right on.
The skis were taller than me. They're like 210s, these big, long, thin skis. It was the Jean-Claude Keely time frame kind of thing. And I almost ran over the president one day. He fell down, and I wasn't paying attention. And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa! And I'm like lifting a ski up and going by, and the Secret Service is laughing at me. It's like Stratton's trying to kill the president. Stuff like that, just joking with me. But it was a great experience. Vail, when it's amazing when years later when I read Brad Thor's book, the Lions of Lucerne, right? It just so evocative of Vail and the mountain and a president on the mountain and stuff like that. It was pretty funny. Yep. But I made a lot of good friends. So after 4.5 years at WACA, traveling the world with Ford, excuse me, Rockefeller. My favorite Rockefeller trip was sort of the end of the administration, and And so Rockefeller does this round the world trip, and he's collecting art stuff in the Air Force aircraft. And I got assigned to go out 2 weeks early to be in Bali. Rockefeller came into Bali and visited one of those wood carvers that does the multi-carving in-depth, like table kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And so I spent 2 weeks in Bali, splitting my time on the radio with a family that worked for the agency and did the same kind of thing, communications, a husband and wife. So that was, for all the weird
tough
places.
Assignment, man.
Yeah, exactly. For all the weird places I went, like Nigeria, out in the bush in Nigeria, just because the VP might show up and things like that. I had a lot of fun trips. South America, and I was in Poland later with Carter, like when his interpreter mistakenly said he lusted after the country in a sexual way instead of "I love Polish people." It was a real snowy night, and it was fun. It's sort of crazy, but yeah. So between
and you got,
yeah.
Sorry, real quick. It's just for me. Obviously, I was born in the '70s, but it's interesting to talk to somebody that's did the job that you did. I've never heard of it, and B, you really got a unique experience. I mean, and I don't say that lightly. I mean, that's fascinating, and to do it in the military service, but also you had kind of a right in the weeds of politics at the time as well, and so in a time of transition in our country and the whole bit. So
Absolutely.
you're over in Poland, right when the Polish. Is it Lech Walesa? I'm saying his name incorrectly.
Lech Walesa, something like that.
Lech Walesa. I apologize. I just butchered it completely. I apologize.
It's okay.
But all the that's kind of fermenting in that time. So really, and you kind of got an eyewitness on a lot of really interesting Cold War history.
Yeah. There was. It was exciting. It was exciting to. The unfortunate thing is, I told my wife this, that I've been all these places in the world, but when you're working and you get one night out,
True.
Or after the principal leaves, like the vice president, or I even supported Kissinger on some trips, before State Department really took over his security, that kind of thing. I went all these places, but one night on the town or half a night on the town after the principal leaves, you don't really get to know what's going on. Not
true.
You can't have a fun time, but you're working. And even being the communicator, is fully integrated into the Secret Service team who was prepping for the visit. So it was called advance work, right? Mm-hmm. And so after 4.5 years at WACA, I thought I had gotten set up to go actually into the Secret Service, into the electronic countermeasures side of the business, the people who would come in pre-advance, sweep the room if the president was going to stay overnight, those kind of things, right? And I forget why, but for some reason that got turned down. I ended up in the physical security side. So I switched over. It was an easy switch. I had to take the test, the government test, and I switched over to the Secret Service. And it was all the same people I'd been working with, a whole lot of them. But my job now was the physical security of the White House, the VP residence, different things like that. When we had, when the campaign was going on, like the 1980 campaign, I got involved in putting security system in Kennedy's house along the Potomac, Senator Kennedy's house, different things like that. So it was interesting. I went to former President Eisenhower's farm up in Pennsylvania, took the old system out. I don't know why we had to take it out, but it was government equipment technically. It was really old stuff, but I went there. I went to another house out on Route 50 where President Kennedy had stayed like 2 days before he went to Dallas, and took more systems out that one of my predecessors had put in. So you're right. I got involved in a lot of that, and it was very interesting. The key thing I think that I take away from all that was really had to be, and I learned this early on, you just had to be flexible, right? You're going into a country, you don't speak the language. Sometimes we'd hire interpreters, like in Poland, the interpreters we hired were actually U.S. students, American students at Polish medical school.
Oh, wow.
And so they didn't know our technology, but they knew the language. And so you have to be flexible and adaptable. And so all that and all the communication stuff I learned, sometimes the hard way, with the kind of communications we used, you had to actually chart out what the wave, the frequency and the radio wave propagation would be. So you'd be in the right frequency at the right time to skip your communications off the ionosphere, say if I'm down in Colombia or in Venezuela with Vice President Rockefeller. I got to make sure that I can skip it back to like Andrews Air Force Base, right? So there was a lot of technology, and I didn't realize how well that was setting me up for that transition I made after I left the government to go become a Green Beret. And
so I was going to say that leads us nicely into that, because I was wondering where that transition would come, because you also didn't have a I would quote unquote normal path into the special operations community either. So can you take us there?
Yeah. So while I was still in D.C. after I left the city, well, in 1980, I worked the big convention up in New York City, that kind of thing, and that year I was gone over 300 days out of 365. And in the government at that time, you had scheduled and unscheduled overtime, and I'd maxed both those out. So essentially, there were a bunch of us working for free. We just couldn't make any more money. Not that we were killing it, as GS5s and GS7s, but at the time. But anyway, so I decided I'd had enough. Went to Florida, relaxed, liked it so much that I used one of the old drum fax machines to send in my resignation and say, hey, sorry, I'm not coming back. Thanks. It's been fun. And just sort of kicked around Florida for a little while, and joined a 11th Special Forces unit. Thought, this would be interesting. This would be a challenge. And started to learn more about it. And I wanted to become a medic. And I wanted to go down a medical path. I was going to junior college in a nursing program, and I wanted to go down the medical path. And then they realized how deep my radio experience was, and they said, no, getting to play God and save people. You're going to carry a lot. You're going to carry a 95-pound ruck with a radio and the new SATCOM gear and batteries and all kinds of stuff. And it was okay. I was young and stupid. I was almost 6 foot tall until I started carrying that heavy rucksack.
Carrying that ruck, right?
Quickly got to 5'10", 5'9", where I'm at now. But yeah. So it was, I came into Special Forces through reserves and then switched over to 20th National Guard. And eventually in 1986, got my beret and joined a team full time. And being in a National Guard team. Yeah, go ahead.
Excuse me real quick, sorry. Can you talk just a little bit about, we talked about it before we started recording, the 20th National Guard. Can you talk a little bit about what their job is, area of operations, their responsibilities?
Yeah, so when I first got to the 20th, the area of operations was tied in with 10th Special Forces. So it was Europe and the top of Africa. And I remember when I first got to the unit, a bunch of the teams went off to Tunisia and worked with Sahara Brigade and things like that. So that was the mission. But somewhere in there, quickly after that, we got switched to be aligned with 7th Special Forces and their South America area of operations, SOUTHCOM, as we call it now, area of operations. And that turned out to be nice. I mean, Venezuela wasn't a place we went to much, at that point. But I'd already been in Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia, different things like that. And Panama, eventually, like 1988, when we decided we'd had enough of Noriega. Right. But so that was the area of operations. At that time, there was a lot of what are now called JSATs, so training missions to support 7th. So, for example, we would go to the Colombian Ranger School called Lancero School down in Tolomati, south of Bogota. And the 7th Special Forces guys would be teaching the officers, and we would be teaching like the basic recruits, sort of a preschool before they would go into the Ranger School, things like that. Later on, it became very, very evident that the Colombians were getting more combat time fighting the narcos and stuff than we did. Yeah, so there was a lot of good opportunity, a lot of classes. I did get to occasionally travel and not have to carry all the radio gear and stuff with my junior radio guy, and eventually worked my way up to E7, and then I was an acting team sergeant. If I stayed a couple more years, I would have been promoted to E8 and that kind of thing. But after 20 years and doing those missions and working at that time as a contractor on MacDill Air Force Base, I decided it was time to retire.
Time to retire.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a bit about just anything that sticks out in South America time? Because obviously, Colombia. You mentioned Colombia. Everybody knows about Escobar and the cartels and the Ochoa brothers and all that stuff. So, any things that stick out from anywhere in South America at that time?
Well, it was interesting when we get to, we back in that day, in those days, we would do, if we had a mission into Colombia, then we'd do an area study. We'd really take and focus down on the area we're going into and understand it, what was going on politically and, from a crime standpoint, that kind of thing. And we do study that very deeply, bone up on our Spanish. At that time, we had cassette tapes, and so I'd be driving back and forth to work, listening and talking to Spanish cassette tapes and stuff in the truck. But yeah, so, but I was still surprised when you read about it, but it's real different when you get on the ground and you experience it. So our first night in Bogota, for example, the first time my team and I went down, they split us up like 3 people to a different house. They split us between different houses for security. And I'm sleeping on a couch underneath this window next to the road. All of a sudden, there's a full automatic gunfight outside the window. I roll to the floor. I've got this, I hated those Beretta pistols, by the way. Anyway, sorry. It just didn't fit my hand real well. But anyway, I roll onto the floor and I'm like, oh, wow, this is interesting, And shotguns are going off, automatic gunfire, cars screeching and driving around and stuff like that. I'm like, well, we're here. And, the guys at the embassy or the security officer at the embassy is talking to us about, always travel in pairs, don't walk side by side, pay attention because people have like scopolamine in spray cans. They spray it in your eyes that like knocks you out. They take all your stuff, and if you're lucky, you wake up with both kidneys. So it was just a sort of a crazy time in Bogota. Medellin was just over the top nuts, right? At that time, and we didn't even go close to Medellin. But so yeah, it was interesting time, very interesting. You get to learn your craft a bit, just sort of self-protection and other things like that, which I had a bit of course, coming from the Secret Service. One of the interesting events we had is we had a warrant officer who was potentially certifiable. He was just sort of nuts, and John had this propensity to grab up the young guys who didn't know any better and do sort of sketchy things, in the name of having fun. And John would get 2 or 3 of the young guys, the new guys on the team or whatever, or because we would roll into town normally as a B team at the company level, supporting 2 or 3 teams. And he would take some of the young guys maybe assigned to the B team, not on a team yet, operational team, and get them in a car and go drive somewhere sketchy for some fun and stuff like that. And you walk into the embassy, and it's funny because it turns out that a gentleman who I'd worked with at Central Command, an Air Force Lieutenant Colonel, he got assigned to the embassy down in Bogota. And I walked in the embassy, and Bruce comes over to me. He's, "What are you guys doing? We got the reports of XYZ and blah, blah, blah." I was like, "Are you guys crazy? Don't make me throw you out of the country."
That's right.
And it's like, "Oh, okay, yes, sir." Salute. It's like, "John, But yeah, we supported. Team went to Ecuador. I didn't go on that one because I was in a Intel class. So my team, the team that I eventually led as an NCO, Colombia and Ecuador, and we did some training in Panama.
Okay.
So those are the three countries we focused on.
Man, your career, you got your frequent flyer miles. So is this your retirement is taking you up into the late 90s? What time frame are we talking about here when you finally decide to retire?
2000.
2000.
Little did I know. I retired in 2000. Okay, need to focus on the career. Had enough fun, focus on the family. And I was actually on a cruise ship, a Norwegian cruise ship, headed to Oslo in the North Sea when the planes hit on 9/11.
Oh, wow.
And there were a bunch of people who had family and kids working in New York and stuff. So you remember how hectic that was.
That's right.
They couldn't fly home, things like that. So, but by that time, I'm working for what are called system integrators. So SAIC, Lockheed, Raytheon, those type of people, and supporting cybersecurity inside the government. And back in that time frame, it was still sort of something people thought of later. They would build their software and then think about security later and different things. And so I got involved in some deep, dark niches of cybersecurity that involved actually moving data between networks, so like an intelligence operator could send a package of information to somebody on a lower network. He might be on top secret, send it down to secret, so the operators could make use of it, stuff like that.
Gotcha.
And
gotcha.
so this started my support of the DoD and the intelligence community that way. I did some work in the early days. I don't know, remember if you remember, there was an encryption code, a commercial encryption code called PGP.
Okay.
And I was involved at NSA on what was called the public key encryption infrastructure, PKI infrastructure board up at NSA. So I had sort of morphed out of quasi-operator into the techie side and supporting NSA and DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency.
Did you notice a big, was 9/11 in your area specifically with cybersecurity? Because to be honest, that's when I kind of remember that term really coming to the fore about cybersecurity and that type of thing. Obviously, that coincides with the .com, all that stuff. So did you notice your business really change at that point, 9/11? Or was that more the internet developing?
No. It was the business changed because we had a huge requirement to share intelligence, for example, to share information. And before that, the systems had really been built to be stovepipe and be secure. So secret classification is where most operations take place. And just in general, so you get an operations order, you have a mission to go do, it's secret. Like everybody on the Special Forces team has a secret clearance. The captain, the warrant officer nowadays, maybe the intel sergeant have top secrets so they can see intelligence data, things like that. And so it increased the need to share information as we had found, and it was sort of a growing requirement after Desert Storm 1, right? Because we had 21 coalition partners. Central Command, its area of operation is 22 or 23 countries.
Right.
We don't share information with everybody,
right,
like Syria and other people like that. But so that need to share information really started to ramp up. And how do you do it securely so that you can share the information, but somebody can't use that pathway to break in to the secret network or the top secret network, those kind of things. So it did grow, and it continues to grow. And it actually then became staying up with the technology.
Right.
New video, new kinds of video. Now you're doing sharing information, or actually you want to not only get this infrared image off the sensor, but you want to control the sensor. You want to pan and tilt it. Now you have a bidirectional protocol. So part of that, the 2000s to 2020 was really staying abreast of the technology was growing faster than there were security means to secure it.
Right.
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 Yeah. And I mean, of course, the most secure networks are ones that aren't connected to anything.
Right.
They're just unto themselves. And there are many of those around the DoD where you've literally got to go into a closet and type in a bunch of commands to get into that one special access program, for example, that there might be only 6 other people in the world that know about what that is.
Gotcha.
So a lot of there's a lot of energy and thought was put into, as the technology bloomed and grew, how do we stay abreast of it? And, like all of a sudden now you've got all this power in your hand, right? Your mobile device,
right.
Like the first iPhone, what do we do? You can we let somebody download an email into that,
Right.
And how does that happen securely? And you've got NSA looking over your shoulder saying you need X, Y, Z and stuff. So very interesting space to be in, whether you're at Colonial Penn Pipeline or, who got attacked not too long ago.
That's right. Right.
Or, just in certainly in the military. Because China was ramping up its capability, the Russians had good capability. Right. And nowadays, of course, you have advanced persistent threats and people called Cozy Bear and other things that do ransomware, or will just try and get a little piece of code in so that it can beacon home and say hello, and you can turn it on like the SolarWinds attack. Yeah. So it was a very interesting 20 years. I did have some of that, not survivor's regret, but regret that I wasn't going downrange with my team. My company up north of Baltimore, it went into the sandbox 3 times. The guys did real well, but I was in the middle of the DoD with a clearance, making sure that the operators, intelligence operators, were supported. So I felt, I was doing something useful.
Absolutely, you were. Absolutely. And putting your putting your 20 years of skill to work. I mean, that's, that was, especially in, like I said, the reason I ask is because, again, now that is so common, right? You mentioned a couple of the incidents of cyber and, with Stuxnet and all. I mean, there's so much that, I don't know. I don't understand any of this, but it's now part of when even a schmuck like me hears about this stuff now on a regular basis, so that's why you're someone that's in that space. So I was just kind of curious because, the from like 2000 to 20 to now, it just seems like it's exponentially growing, the technology and the capabilities of our adversaries. You hear about the MSS with China and Russia and all that, but I'm sure there's, guys sitting in their basement somewhere in the middle of the Caucasus that have the capabilities to do damage as well. So it seems to be coming from a lot of places now.
Oh, absolutely. And a lot of those guys in the Caucasus or wherever are actually supported via General Gerasimov and his right. hybrid warfare mantra. We know the SVR or GRU support them in the background, things like that. And MSS also has some, quote, non-government entities that do stuff for them. We've got the Iranians who aren't too bad. They cause havoc around the world where they want to, oftentimes. So, yeah, there's a lot of those. If somebody listening wants to see what it looks like, you can just type in ATP and see the list of ATP's Advanced Persistent Threat. And that stands for the kind of software that the adversary wants to put into your network through that email that says, oh, click on this link,
yeah,
right? And then it downloads that into the network, and it might sit for 3 months, six months, a year, just dormant, waiting to open up and then start scanning the network, doing other things. And so, yeah, it's an exciting environment. The one advantage I had, especially when it came to like supporting U.S. Special Operations Command when it stood up, was I'd been at some level I'd operated, so I knew what the operator needed, what the operator looked for, what some of the special teams needed, that kind of thing, and kept pushing forward to support that. So
awesome. What crystal ball down the line? What are the next 5-10 years? What are emerging threats from the technological side? Is it just more of this? The capabilities get quicker. What do you see?
Well, it's interesting from an industry standpoint. the way that Apple is going from a privacy point to give you more privacy makes it harder for us to help secure that. So it really makes it hard if you're using Apple products in an enterprise, makes it hard for us to secure it because the things we could do to watch activity, to see if there's something nefarious that's been loaded onto your iPhone, or if you are doing something more than just need something more than you need additional training. If you're banging around, it makes it harder for us to look to see if you're trying to exfiltrate data, whether you're, we call that insider threat. However you're motivated to be that insider threat, they make it harder. The interesting thing about what's going on now with the idea of we need to start making chips here in the United States also provides an advantage for us from a security standpoint, because there are things we can do to inspect what's going on with chips that are made here that we can in China, right? When it comes to very sensitive things, the DoD will often make its own chips because it knows its manufacturing process, it has it, and it can control that for very sensitive things that go on, versus saying, we're going to get XYZ chip from somewhere, that could have bad coding. The apps are really the open gateway to the world, right? WhatsApp, TikTok, things like that. I remember, was it 2 years ago at Christmas, somebody realized that their little doll that they had given their daughter or something, the data was, everything that she was saying to the doll and playing with the doll was going back to China.
Right. That's right.
Things like that.
That's right.
The other big thing is, if we get away from the DoD, you look at, you're in SoCal, you might have a smart meter at your house, right?
Yeah.
One of these things, smart meter. Well, that smart meter is an IP device, internet protocol device. It may run its network over the power line, but it's still a device that opens a gateway into your house. If you're buying like wireless service from SoCal Edison, I happen to know them pretty well. That's potentially a gateway into your house, into your systems, things like that. Other things people don't think are threats because they're so convenient are like these home video systems. Yeah. One of the home video systems came up with a advertising campaign that said, we're watching your house, but if you've got these cameras inside, we can record, like the Kodak moment. We can record these moments in your family's life as your kids are growing up and things. Well, that's all your personal data, biometrics, everything are going to this cloud, So the more we connect, it's tough to have connectivity and access and not impact privacy / security. And so what's that balance,
Well, that's the whole time you were talking. That's just what I kept thinking of, the balance of what you mentioned when you started off about Apple, right? That, the more people, the privacy aspect from a consumer perspective, I say good, the more control I have. But then I hadn't even thought about from your end, how that makes it more difficult to protect as well. So you have this constant, it's good to get your perspective because it's a constant, I'm a big privacy guy, but at the same time, how do you protect us? Or how are we protected? Because that's beyond my capability. You know what I mean? So
right. And there are a lot of organizations, especially educational organizations, right, and marketing, multimedia companies. A lot of companies use Apple products, and so it's an interesting, not fight, but something you got to think about to balance that, right? So oftentimes there are organizations I know of that they just plain expect that the bad guys are going to get in their network. And what they work really hard to do is make sure they can't beacon the information out. So if the malware comes in and it's not malicious, it's not a ransomware or locking up my systems or destroying a network, things like that, they will just work to make sure that anything that's there can't beacon home, call home, and then send information out. So they just expect they're going to be attacked. It's already here, and how do we stop it from leaking data? How do they stop, intellectual property or other things?
Just minimizing damage at that point. God, it puts me in mind of the reboot of Battlestar Galactica, where they, where that ship is just on old phones and I don't know if you saw it, but it reminds me that that ship survived because it wasn't in the network, and so it's like we're going, listening to you talk. It's kind of,
oh yeah,
that was a little bit prophetic,
Well, it is. It is funny. I mean, at our house here, we have cell phones, and my wife, who's getting ready to retire and give up her real estate business, but she has an IP phone. It runs over the internet, through our cable provider. Well, when the phones go down or the power goes down, the internet goes down, then there's no more. One of the nice things about the plain old telephone system, right, with 2 copper wires is they had backup power at the central office, and that line would always work. Right, the line would have to be broken. The telephone pole would have to be knocked down before that system didn't work. And so the more digitized we get, the more held captive we are to those systems. Have to be very redundant, secure, and reliable, or they're useless. They're just sort of a nice iPhone 11 brick in your hand. It's like, I could take pictures and play music if I've got it downloaded, but otherwise it's worthless. Yeah.
You got to use it to throw it at the zombies at last resort, I guess, at that point, right?
Last resort. Actually, turn on the light, tape it to somebody else's shoulder, run the other way.
You thought about this, Steve. You thought about this.
It's like the old story. You don't have to be faster than a bear, just faster than your friend. Your former friend.
Your former friend. I was going to say at that point. Yeah. All right. So take us into Shadow Tier. A whole other career. Has this always been something that you've been writing? Has this something been going on for your whole career, or is this more recent?
No, actually, I paid little attention at English classes during school. I love good books and thrillers in particular, and the inciting incident actually for Shadow Tier took place in '93, and so it took me until 2019, in sort of the break between Christmas and Thanksgiving, where my wife said, just write a story. You don't have to write a book, just write the story down. And I got to going, and of course my writing was terrible, but I got the story down and the storyline and that kind of thing like that. And then I finished that in about 6 months, and then it took about another year with critique partners and hiring editors and other things to get the story into a decent place. And as I was going along, I thought, well, this is actually fun. I like this. I like telling stories, writing stories down, coming up with crazy ideas. And so I actually signed up for a mentorship with a guy named Jerry Jenkins. Okay. And Jerry Jenkins is the author, the actual writer who worked with the pastor Tim LaHaye to do the Left Behind series. Oh,
Left Behind series, yeah.
Yeah, so Jerry I live just outside of Denver, and Jerry lives down in Colorado Springs. So I did the 6-month membership and realized how much I didn't know about writing, how you're supposed to plot, how you can't jump from this person's view to this person's view willy-nilly. Because I was writing it, he said, Steve, we're writing books, not a screenplay. Like, it's not where the camera can just look at the different people and their oh my gods and whatever. So I learned a lot there, and just have since that time continued to take classes and work with different people to refine my craft and things like that. So so Shadow Tier, I queried it. I know my query letter wasn't real succinct and things like that, but I forget how I was put onto him, but I was told, hey, check out Force Poseidon. He's turns out to be an ex-Navy chief, and he supports new veteran writers, things like that. Yeah. So I sent him the manuscript, and he's like, oh, wait a minute, let's talk. And I ended up signing a contract for one book, and then the option on the next 2. So you could call it a 3-book. I don't call it a 3-book contract, but it's like he's got the right of refusal for 2 after that in the same series. And anyway, so I got paid a little bit of money, nothing big, but it was nice to work with somebody who, you know, a full up professional editor. Yeah, it took over a year because he told me, hey, I'm backed up. I've got these other books I need to get out. And I said, okay, that's okay. You know, it's my debut book. I'll wait, not a problem. And I'll just keep writing. So actually, this book, Shadow Tier, came out in...
Is it 22?
Yeah, 22. Yeah, yep. June of 22. And before it came out, I wrote Shadow Tier 2, and I wrote part of Shadow Tier 3.
Nice.
I just kept writing.
Yeah.
And would have been better if I'd waited a little longer till my writing was better, but he and I worked through it. So Shadow Tier 2 is now with my publisher, Force Poseidon, and is scheduled to come out later this year. So awesome. We'll do a cover reveal, the name, you know, the date and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the book's back with the publisher, and now I'm into Shadow Tier 3 and reworking it a bit.
I guess that's a good thing about being creating, you know, writing a series in that sense that you really get to explore the world, right? You're not creating a whole new world, you know, in the sense of a character, and you can build on his traits and kind of get to know. Because I read a bunch of series as well. I love Jack Carr, Brad Thor, obviously. I've read all that stuff. So I kind of like, and I'm an old Sherlock Holmes fan. It's the same reason I like Hercule Poirot and Sherlock Holmes, is because you get to know these characters and you get to grow with them and kind of go ups and downs rather than having to get to know a whole new personality, and if that makes sense. And I guess from a writer's perspective, maybe it makes it not easier, but a little more interesting. You can kind of explore different avenues with that character. Yeah,
I'd say in the first book, I mean, my characterization is Lance is out for revenge.
Yeah.
Pretty simple, right? Second book, start to open that up and look into Lance a little bit more. Lance Beowulf, my protagonist, and his girlfriend and wife, eventually, Ellie Parker, and some of the other folks. So I think I'm getting better at characterization. I think I've always been pretty good at the scenes, you know, the action scenes, of course, you know. But yeah, I find it a lot of fun. I normally get up at 4:30 and we'll take like a half hour to drink some coffee, look at social media a little bit, and then get into writing. And I'll write till noontime. Then afternoon and working out, I'll, you know, get back into research or reading somebody else's book, like a Brad Thor, Jack Carr, you know, Andrews and Wilson.
Yeah, I've talked to them. They've had them on
Don
as well.
Bentley.
Great.
Yeah. Don Bentley, Brad Taylor. I really like.
Yep.
Pike Logan, that kind of thing. So I continue to learn. That's the great thing. I've always loved the learning process, learning new things. Not useless trivia, but like I can go down a rabbit hole, you know. I have a friend whose debut book is going to come out this year, and he's a Navy fighter pilot. So he's talking about how they hook up the bar, you know, on the catapult and stuff, and there's these collars and all this stuff. And so I'm on the tech side looking at all that. Right. You know, so that's sort of, yeah. My earliest book that I ever read that I remember were sci-fi, like Ben Nova.
Yep.
Certainly Dune, right? Just like one of my all-time favorites.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah, I love this new series, this new movie. But
I just watched it finally. I've read that book off probably 8 times over my life, but so I was a little, you know, I was like, okay, well, how are they going to handle this movie? But I thought visually it was stunning, you know, and they got the characterizations right. I thought the acting was good, and so it's kind of Anyway.
I like the Jason Momoa and Paul interaction. Oh, you gained some muscle. No, you didn't.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, so and I've read every Dune book to include Frank Herbert's son and all those books he wrote.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because he wrote specifically about Chapter House and all that. So, but as I started reading, it was science fiction, and then switched over to like Eric von Lustbader and White Ninja and some other thrillers like that. And then because of needing to go back actually to finish school, I got to a point in my career where it's like you can't get promoted without getting your degree.
That's right.
There was more of a focus on school books, finishing out my college degree. And then after that, it was technology. So I took a break there for a while. I would travel. I'd always had a paperback. I'm always reading. It just makes for an easy flight when I'm reading and I fall asleep.
That's right.
Reading,
That's right.
I might have to go back a few pages, but it's good. So getting into this writing, starting to meet some of these people, take these classes, just very invigorating. I love it. I've been lucky. I've only had like writer's block once that I can remember. And I was really stumped. And I'm like, well, you know what? I just need to get away from it, let it go.
That's right.
And I forget if I think that's when I read Lions of Lucerne. And I was laughing about, having been in Vail so much before it, not laughing, it's like, oh, this is good, this is good. Yep. And I came back to my book, and then it's like, oh, okay, here's what I need to do. It was nice. Right. And so right. I really, the community, all these people have been so open and welcoming. And I just really enjoying it, writing, thinking of stories. I've got ideas for different series. The other day I had this idea about a way somebody might do something nefarious and like writing it down in my notebook for later. I don't know if I'll ever use it, but it was like just this came to me, and I'm like, I hope nobody does that. But
well, that's a thing with someone in your, and when you write and you create like that, everything potentially becomes a plot point or a setting or something like that. And especially with your career, I mean, you could go back to your South America time and spin off an entire, there's just so many different, it's a rich vein, there's so many different things.
I used a lot of that. So the first Shadow Tier book takes place in 1998.
Okay.
And so my editor was like, yeah, and Lance grabs a SIG P365. I'm like, no, it didn't exist back then. And we both laughing about it. And it's like, oh yeah, we got to make sure stuff exists.
That's
the
right.
next book is in 2003.
Okay.
And so Lance has, I can give away a little bit here. Lance has stuff going on a reservation. Of course, we're in Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if a lot of people know this, but early on, the administration realized in the early 2000s that the Taliban was making about $400 million a year from opium.
That's right.
But none of the military wanted to fight terrorism. Nobody in the military really wanted to fight a drug war.
That's right.
And so there's a gap. So interesting place for the Shadow Tier team. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah,
very
yeah.
cool. Okay. Obviously, you have your website. I'll link all that. How do people get connected with you, learn about your book, order it, all of the above?
Yeah, they can do that on the website. On the website, it's got listed all the online places where you can buy the book, Indie Books, and of course Amazon. You can order it through Target and Walmart. It won't be on a shelf, but you can order it electronically, things like that. Mm-hmm. So that's on the website. If you happen to be in the Denver area, I do have books in tattered cover downtown Denver in the Colorado author section.
Cool.
Some things like that. Down in Virginia, great friend Sandra out at the Book Dragon in Staunton, Virginia. She's got some signed copies of the book. So plenty of ways to get it in hardcover. You can get it. I can get it from me signed hardcover, paperback, or digitally through Amazon, that kind of thing.
It's going to be a audiobook at some point. Do you have that? Do you have plans for that? Or
Being a debut author, there wasn't much appetite to spend money on an audiobook right away. But maybe we'll see with the second book. Not only am I working on book 3 and cleaning up the ideas I had about that, but I've already got 40 chapters of book 4 done also.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So, which is takes Lance and Ellie some interesting places. So
very
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it's fun to have the potential for a series and things like that. And like you said, look at some of the characters and see who people connect with if there's a opportunity to spin it off for some of the characters. But I have images of real people and things that have happened, like you said, from my career. different things with technology. Some places bring the technology forward a little bit, like experimentally, or it's something from DARPA. You know, I might say it didn't come out in '98; it came out in '97. It's experimental, but having been in that world, it's easy to do that. Somebody fact checks me, I'm like, you got me. It's good.
it's fiction. You can always. It's fiction.
It's a prototype. It's experimental. Yeah.
Because you get in it. Because there are those people that really, you use internet comments, right? Or whatever. You see somebody. Well, that actually technically came in August, and I said, well, I don't really. I mean, we all have our areas of expertise. It's almost like you can get too far into how the sausage is made and lose the forest for the trees. Because if it's a good, if it's a good story, you want to suspend your disbelief a little bit. It's just like with any good Interstellar, the movie, or whatever. I'm sure someone could pick apart some of the technology, but the movie was mind blowing to me. So that's all I care about.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly. I try not to go overboard. Brad Taylor has a great saying. It's like, you tell him once what it is, and then after that, he just pulls his pistol.
That's right.
You don't have to keep saying it's the XL 365, whatever, with 17 rounds, 9mm at this many feet per second, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, exactly.
And even Mark Graney, who, excellent author, and a gun guy, he doesn't overdo it. You might have it there, but after that. So, yeah, I love it. It just opens up a world and keeps me creative and thinking. I don't want to slow down. I don't want to just, sit in a rocking chair and read books on a porch kind of thing. I'm active. Like you and I talked, after this, I'll be going out to the gun range to do some training, be a range security officer. I do some consulting on the side. In theory, I've retired, and my wife's like, is that what we're going to call this thing? You're not slowing down too much, but...
Yeah, you weren't going to go. You were never going to go sit on a boat in the Florida Keys. And just only do that. So no. That's,
right. I'd be happy to go to the Keys with you and go fishing, but I'm not sitting on that boat in the dock, drinking a beer, waiting for something to happen. So
no, that's great. It's an awesome outlet, and kind of interesting for someone that works I would think a very different part of your brain too. So than what your career has been. So that's awesome. Well, and then always ask this at the end, when you look back on your service, military or otherwise, what are you most proud of your time?
Just in general, service to the nation. When I was in uniform, when I was National Guard, and then as a contractor, staying in the mix and I think doing good things for the troops on the front line. And then also, I think it's really family. That's the most important thing. And having more time with my family, and my wife and I are now able to travel and stuff like that, for research.
Right, exactly. Right.
For research and things like that. It's good. And, just happy to be a part of the solution and not the problem. Yeah, I think is the big thing, right?
Awesome. All right, well, Steve Stratton, Shadow Tier. I'll link it all up so people can find your book. And excited to see what comes next. And I really appreciate you reaching out and coming on the show, man.
Thank you, much appreciated.
All right, all the best.